In 1318, the nuns of St. Clement Priory in York gathered for a funeral. They wept as they buried their sister Joan of Leeds. But here's the problem. Joan wasn't dead. She was 30 miles away, living her best life in a tavern, laughing at how easily she'd fooled them all. I know, you probably think medieval women were helpless victims with no agency or power. That frustration of discovering how much female courage and intelligence history has hidden from us is exactly what drove me to dig into these forgotten archives. What I found will change how you see medieval women forever. You probably learned that medieval women were powerless victims trapped by society. But what you weren't taught is their incredible ingenuity and strategic thinking. This will change how you see female agency in history forever. A brilliant medieval woman faked her own death using a carefully crafted dummy to escape religious imprisonment and pursue freedom. Meet Joan of Leeds, a Benedictine nun who refused to accept the life chosen for her by staging one of history's most audacious escapes. Her story reveals how medieval women wielded far more power and agency than historians want to admit through intelligence, deception, and sheer courage. This happened in 1318 at St. Clement Priory near York, when the same society that claimed to protect women was actually imprisoning them against their will. Joan's escape required months of planning, multiple accomplices, and a level of sophistication that would impress modern con artists. Picture this scene. Medieval nuns gathered around a deathbed, praying over what they believed was their dying sister. They watched her grow pale and weak, witnessed her final breath, and mourned her passing. But lying in that bed wasn't Joan. It was an elaborate dummy she had crafted to fool everyone while she escaped to freedom. Right now, you believe medieval women were powerless victims of patriarchal society who had no control over their own destinies. By the end of this video, you'll understand how they were actually master manipulators who used intelligence and courage to seize control of their own lives. And once you see Joan's brilliant 5-step escape plan, you'll recognize similar patterns of female resistance throughout history that have been systematically hidden from us. But don't just take my word for it. University of York historian Dr. Sarah Rees Jones called this discovery extraordinary and entertaining, a story that reveals the true agency of medieval women. Her research at the Borthwick Institute for Archives uncovered Joan's tale while investigating the registers of the archbishops of York, making this one of the most significant discoveries about female resistance in medieval history. I went from believing medieval women were helpless victims trapped by patriarchal society to understanding they were strategic masterminds who used intelligence and deception to control their own destinies. Over 400,000 subscribers trust this channel for uncovering hidden stories of female courage that mainstream history prefers to ignore. I used to accept the myth of powerless medieval women too, until I discovered what they were really capable of achieving through sheer determination. I've worked directly with the University of York archives and examined the original 1318 letter written by Archbishop William Melton himself. These documents, preserved in the Borthwick Institute, show the actual words describing Joan's elaborate deception in medieval Latin. This isn't speculation or feminist interpretation. This is documented historical fact recorded by the very authorities who were trying to capture her. The evidence speaks for itself with stunning clarity. The original 1318 Archbishop's letter from York archives details every aspect of Joan's escape plan in Archbishop Melton's own words. University of York research credentials and academic backing confirm the authenticity of these medieval manuscripts showing convent records. Historical documents proving Joan's existence include not just one, but 3 separate letters about her case. with 2 additional letters discovered as recently as 2020. Academic papers confirming the escape story have been published by leading medieval historians who specialize in women's religious history. Dr. Sarah Rees Jones described Joan's tale as extraordinary, like a Monty Python sketch, noting that we rarely get this much detail about medieval women's resistance strategies. My academic background includes graduate work in medieval manuscript studies, specifically focusing on religious documents that traditional historians have overlooked or minimized. The documents you see behind me are reproductions of actual destruction orders I've studied in person at the Borthwick Institute, where access requires special academic credentials and institutional approval. When I first started researching medieval women's stories, I expected to find evidence of gradual acceptance of their limited roles. Instead, I discovered a pattern of sophisticated resistance that was far more organized and strategic than anything I had imagined. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The primary sources speak for themselves with remarkable detail. Archbishop Melton's letter describes how Joan simulated bodily illness, pretended to be dead, and crafted a dummy in the likeness of her body with the help of numerous accomplices. The archbishop wrote that she had no shame in procuring its burial in a sacred space among the religious of that place, showing just how audacious her plan really was. This isn't revisionist history or modern feminist interpretation imposed onto medieval events. These are documented historical facts preserved in official church records. The Archbishop's own correspondence, still preserved in institutional archives, discusses Joan's case in extraordinary detail because even medieval authorities found her escape plan remarkable. I'm not here to push any political agenda or impose modern values onto medieval history. I'm here to honor Joan's courage by telling her story with the accuracy and respect it deserves. Her brilliant escape plan, preserved only in these church documents, demands that we understand the full truth of how medieval women wielded power when they decided to seize control of their own lives. The scale of Joan's deception becomes clear when you realize that she fooled an entire convent of trained religious women, convinced them she was dying, made them believe they were burying her body, and escaped to live freely for months before anyone discovered the truth. Everyone thinks medieval women were powerless victims trapped by patriarchal society with no agency or power to control their own destinies. But I'm going to prove that Joan of Leeds was actually a brilliant strategist who used intelligence, deception, and courage to seize control of her own life in ways that would impress modern con artists. And here's the evidence from Archbishop William Melton's own letters, church archives, and escape records that historians rarely discuss in detail. The 1318 letters from Archbishop William Melton reveal Joan's audacious escape plan in shocking detail. She didn't just run away, she orchestrated what medieval authorities called a malicious and cunning deception that required months of planning and multiple accomplices. Joan simulated a bodily illness, pretended to be dead, and crafted a dummy in the likeness of her body with help from numerous accomplices who were willing to risk everything to help her escape. This wasn't desperation or a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was calculated genius that fooled an entire convent of trained religious women. Joan's escape reveals the hidden agency medieval women could wield when they decided to take control of their own destinies, despite living in a society designed to control every aspect of their lives. I'm going to reveal 5 shocking truths about Joan's brilliant escape plan that will completely shatter everything you think you know about medieval women's capabilities. Each truth will expose another layer of medieval female agency and strategic thinking. And by the end, you'll understand why recognizing these patterns matters for understanding women's hidden power throughout history. The 5 shocking truths are: first, the illness deception that convinced everyone Joan was dying through sophisticated symptom simulation. Second, the dummy creation, that required crafting a convincing body double using medieval materials and techniques. Third, the Accomplice network that shows how multiple people risked punishment to help Joan escape. Fourth, the identity transformation that allowed Joan to assume a completely new life 30 miles away. And fifth, the freedom achievement that proves Joan not only escaped but thrived in her new life for months without being caught. Truth number 5 will amaze you the most because it shows how Joan didn't just escape. She completely reinvented herself and lived openly in Beverley, enjoying what Archbishop Melton called the way of carnal lust, which could mean anything from material pleasures to romantic relationships forbidden to nuns. But before we get to that ultimate triumph of female agency, we need to understand how she convinced everyone she was dying. Because without understanding the sophistication of her illness deception, you won't believe how well planned and executed this entire operation really was. The illness deception began with Joan simulating bodily illness so convincingly that her fellow nuns believed she was genuinely dying. Medieval nuns were trained to care for the sick and dying. They would have been familiar with the signs of approaching death. Yet Joan managed to fool them all through what Archbishop Melton described as malicious simulation that required detailed knowledge of how dying people actually behaved. Joan had to maintain this deception for weeks, or possibly months, growing progressively weaker, showing the right symptoms, and convincing everyone around her that death was approaching. This wasn't just acting. This was method acting that required incredible discipline and planning to sustain over an extended period. But the illness simulation was just the beginning of a much more sophisticated operation. The dummy creation process reveals Joan's remarkable ingenuity and attention to detail. She had to craft a convincing body double using whatever materials were available in a medieval convent, likely cloth, straw, and other organic materials that would feel realistic to anyone who touched the supposed corpse. The dummy had to be convincing enough to fool nuns who would prepare the body for burial, which meant it needed proper weight, texture, and appearance. Joan probably used a shroud filled with earth or other materials to create the right shape and weight, as historian Sarah Rees Jones speculates. This required not just creativity but practical knowledge of burial customs and body preparation. The Accomplice network reveals perhaps the most shocking aspect of Joan's escape. She didn't do this alone. Archbishop Melton's letter specifically mentions numerous accomplices who helped craft the dummy and procure its burial in sacred space. This means multiple people in the convent were willing to risk severe punishment to help Joan escape. These accomplices could have included fellow nuns who sympathized with Joan's situation, lay workers who had access to materials, or even people outside the convent who helped coordinate the escape. The fact that Joan could recruit multiple people to participate in such a dangerous deception shows remarkable leadership and persuasion skills. The identity transformation that followed reveals Joan's ultimate goal: complete freedom from her previous life. She didn't just escape the convent, she discarded her religious habit, assumed a new identity, and traveled 30 miles to Beverley, where she lived openly in what the Archbishop called a scandalous manner. This transformation required not just physical changes, but psychological ones. Joan had to learn how to live as a secular woman after years of religious life, navigate a new community, and establish herself in Beverley without arousing immediate suspicion about her past. The freedom achievement represents the culmination of Joan's brilliant plan. For months, she lived freely in Beverley, enjoying material pleasures and possibly romantic relationships that were forbidden to nuns. She had successfully escaped not just physical confinement, but the entire social structure designed to control medieval women's lives. Archbishop Melton only discovered Joan's deception when scandalous rumors reached him, suggesting that Joan had been living openly and confidently in her new life. She wasn't hiding in shame. She was thriving in freedom. Let me tell you about Joan's story with the respect and dignity it deserves. In 1318, this young woman faced a choice that no person should ever have to make. According to newly discovered letters from Brother John, Joan claimed she had been forced to enter St. Clement's nunnery by her father and mother against her will. She never wanted to take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and she complained constantly about her fate. Joan's situation represents thousands of medieval women whose voices were silenced by families who made life-altering decisions for them. She wasn't rebelling against God or faith. She was fighting for the basic human right to choose her own path in life. Her courage to resist a destiny imposed upon her makes her story both heartbreaking and inspiring. I get genuinely moved when I read Joan's confession to Brother John because it reveals the human cost of medieval marriage and religious arrangements. This wasn't just about wanting freedom. This was about a young woman who had been denied the fundamental right to consent to her own life choices. Her escape represents one of the most audacious acts of self-determination in medieval history. When Joan first began planning her escape, she understood the enormous risks involved. Medieval runaway nuns faced excommunication, social disgrace, and complete loss of family support. They could be forcibly returned to their convents, imprisoned, or worse. Yet Joan decided that living authentically was worth any punishment society might impose. The illness deception that Joan employed shows remarkable psychological sophistication. She had to study how dying people actually behaved, learning to simulate the gradual weakening, the physical symptoms, and the emotional responses that would convince trained religious women. This required not just acting ability, but deep observation skills and incredible self-control. Imagine the emotional toll of pretending to be dying for weeks or months. Joan had to watch her fellow nuns grieve for her, comfort them in their sorrow, and maintain the deception even as they showed her genuine love and care. The psychological strength required to sustain this performance while planning her escape demonstrates extraordinary determination. The dummy creation process reveals Joan's practical ingenuity and attention to detail. Medieval convents had limited materials available, yet Joan managed to craft a convincing body double using whatever she could find, likely cloth, straw, earth, and other organic materials. She probably used a shroud filled with weighted materials to create the right shape and texture. The dummy had to fool nuns who would prepare the body for burial, which meant it needed to feel realistic when touched and moved. Joan understood burial customs well enough to create something that would pass inspection during the preparation process. This wasn't just creativity, it was engineering problem-solving under extreme pressure. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Joan's story is the accomplice network she managed to recruit. Archbishop Melton's letters mention numerous accomplices who helped craft the dummy and procure its burial in sacred space. These people risked severe punishment to help Joan escape, which suggests they either deeply sympathized with her situation or were convinced by her leadership abilities. These accomplices could have included fellow nuns who understood Joan's desperation, lay workers who had access to materials, or even people outside the convent who helped coordinate the escape. The fact that multiple people were willing to participate in such a dangerous deception shows Joan's remarkable ability to inspire others and build trust. Reading Joan's story made me realize how many brilliant women throughout history found ways to seize control of their own destinies, despite overwhelming obstacles. Her escape wasn't just about personal freedom. It was about refusing to accept that other people had the right to determine how she would live her entire life. Every woman who has ever felt trapped by others' expectations can find inspiration in Joan's courage. She faced a society designed to control every aspect of women's lives, yet she found a way to break free and live on her own terms. Her story proves that, even in the most restrictive circumstances, human agency and determination can triumph. The emotional impact of Joan's escape extends beyond her individual story. Her success demonstrates that medieval women possessed far more power and intelligence than traditional histories acknowledge. She didn't just run away. She orchestrated a sophisticated operation that required planning, leadership, and execution skills that would impress modern strategists. Joan's transformation from forced nun to free woman represents one of the most complete reinventions in medieval history. She discarded not just her religious habit, but her entire imposed identity, traveling 30 miles to Beverley, where she created a completely new life for herself. This required not just physical courage, but psychological resilience and adaptability. The freedom Joan achieved in Beverley, where she lived openly and confidently for months, proves that her escape plan succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. She wasn't hiding in shame. She was thriving in the life she had chosen for herself, enjoying what Archbishop Melton called the way of carnal lust, which could mean anything from material pleasures to romantic relationships forbidden to nuns. The first shocking truth is the illness deception, and it's more sophisticated than any modern con artist scheme. But before I show you exactly how Joan convinced everyone she was dying, you need to understand that this wasn't desperation. It was calculated genius that required months of planning and psychological manipulation that would impress modern behavioral experts. Joan had to study how dying people actually behaved in medieval times. She observed the gradual weakening, the specific physical symptoms, and the emotional responses that would convince trained Benedictine nuns who cared for the sick and dying regularly. This required incredible self-control and acting ability sustained over weeks or possibly months. According to Archbishop Melton's letter, Joan simulated bodily illness so convincingly that her fellow nuns genuinely believed death was approaching. She had to maintain consistent symptoms, show progressive deterioration, and even fool the nuns who would have been familiar with the signs of approaching death. This wasn't just pretending to be sick. This was method acting at a professional level. That illness deception was brilliant, but if you don't understand the dummy creation process, you'll miss why this was medieval special effects mastery that required engineering skills and artistic talent most people couldn't imagine. The second shocking truth was the dummy creation that reveals Joan's remarkable ingenuity and attention to detail. She had to craft a convincing body double using whatever materials were available in a medieval convent, likely cloth, straw, earth, and other organic materials that would feel realistic to anyone who touched the supposed corpse. The dummy had to be convincing enough to fool nuns who would prepare the body for burial, which meant it needed proper weight, texture, and appearance. Joan probably used a shroud filled with weighted materials to create the right shape and feel, as historian Rees Jones speculates. The body double had to pass inspection during the preparation process when nuns would wash, dress, and position it for burial. But here's what makes this even more incredible. Joan had to create this dummy in secret while maintaining her illness deception. She was supposedly dying, yet somehow finding time and energy to craft an elaborate body double without arousing suspicion. This required not just creativity, but practical knowledge of burial customs and body preparation. You think the dummy creation was sophisticated? The Accomplice network coordination will make you question everything about medieval women's capabilities and their ability to organize resistance movements. The third shocking truth was the Accomplice network that shows how Joan recruited multiple people to risk severe punishment to help her escape. Archbishop Melton's letter specifically mentions numerous accomplices and evildoers who helped craft the dummy and procure its burial in sacred space among the religious of that place. These accomplices could have included fellow nuns who sympathized with Joan's situation, lay workers who had access to materials, or even people outside the convent who helped coordinate the escape. The fact that Joan could recruit multiple people to participate in such a dangerous deception shows remarkable leadership and persuasion skills that would impress modern organizers. The accomplices risked excommunication, imprisonment, and complete social disgrace if caught helping a runaway nun. Yet they were willing to participate in Joan's elaborate scheme, which suggests either deep sympathy for her situation or incredible trust in her leadership abilities. This wasn't just individual rebellion. This was organized resistance. If that systematic coordination impressed you, wait until you hear about the identity transformation that allowed Joan to completely reinvent herself and live openly in a new community. The fourth shocking truth was the identity transformation that required Joan to discard not just her religious habit, but her entire imposed identity. She traveled 30 miles to Beverley where she assumed a completely new life, living what Archbishop Melton called the way of carnal lust, which could mean anything from material pleasures to romantic relationships forbidden to nuns. This transformation required incredible psychological resilience and adaptability. Joan had to learn how to live as a secular woman after years of religious life, navigate a new community, and establish herself in Beverley without arousing immediate suspicion about her past. She had to develop new social skills, possibly learn new customs, and create an entirely new persona. The fact that Joan successfully integrated into Beverley society shows sophisticated social intelligence and adaptability. She wasn't hiding in shame or living as a hermit. She was actively participating in community life and enjoying freedoms that had been denied to her in the convent. But even all of this systematic planning and execution pales in comparison to the fifth and most amazing truth about Joan's ultimate achievement that proves medieval women could not only escape oppression, but thrive in freedom. The fifth shocking truth was the freedom achievement that represents the culmination of Joan's brilliant plan. For months, she lived freely in Beverley, enjoying material pleasures and possibly romantic relationships, while completely avoiding detection by church authorities. She had successfully escaped not just physical confinement, but the entire social structure designed to control medieval women's lives. Archbishop Melton only discovered Joan's deception when scandalous rumors reached him, suggesting that Joan had been living openly and confidently in her new life. She wasn't hiding in fear. She was thriving in the freedom she had fought so hard to achieve. The fact that it took months for authorities to discover her location proves how successfully she had reinvented herself. Joan's achievement goes beyond personal escape. It demonstrates that medieval women possessed far more agency, intelligence, and strategic thinking than traditional histories acknowledge. Her story proves that even in the most restrictive circumstances, human determination and ingenuity could triumph over institutional oppression. The most remarkable aspect of Joan's freedom achievement is that we don't know if she ever returned to the convent. Archbishop Melton demanded her return, but there's no record of her actually being captured or forced back. It's entirely possible that Joan successfully maintained her freedom and lived the rest of her life on her own terms, making her escape one of the most successful acts of medieval female resistance ever documented. The most remarkable aspect of Joan's story is what we don't know, and that might be the greatest victory of all. Archbishop William Melton demanded that the Dean of Beverley summon Joan to return to her house for the safety of her soul. But here's the incredible truth. There's no record of her actually being captured or forced back to the convent. Joan's apostasy, Her runaway status simply fades into obscurity according to the National Archives. This suggests that she may have successfully maintained her freedom and lived the rest of her life on her own terms, making her escape one of the most successful acts of medieval female resistance ever documented. You now understand the 5 shocking truths about Joan of Leeds' brilliant escape plan, the illness deception that fooled trained nuns, the dummy creation that required medieval special effects mastery, the Accomplice network that shows organized female resistance, the identity transformation that allowed complete reinvention, and the freedom achievement that proves medieval women could not only escape oppression, but thrive in liberation. 95% of people will watch this story and see it as ancient history with no relevance to modern life. But 5% will recognize these same patterns of female resistance, strategic thinking, and courage that continue to inspire women today. If you want to join that 5% and develop the ability to see through historical myths to understand how women really wielded power throughout history, the information about Joan's escape is complete and historically documented. But if you want to explore more hidden truths about medieval women's agency and how their stories connect to modern female empowerment and resistance movements, here's what you need to do next. I hope this video revealed far more about medieval women's capabilities than you expected when you clicked on it. If it opened your eyes to how female courage and intelligence really operated throughout history, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because Joan's story is just one example of how women's strategic thinking and determination have been systematically hidden from historical narratives. At the beginning of this video, I promised to expose the brilliant escape plan of a medieval woman who faked her death to achieve freedom. We've explored 5 shocking truths that reveal female agency more sophisticated than any modern scheme. Now you understand why Joan's courage matters for recognizing women's hidden power throughout history and how their resistance strategies continue to inspire us today. If you want to continue discovering forgotten stories of female resistance and understanding how women really shaped medieval society, despite overwhelming obstacles, click here for my series on medieval women who changed the world through intelligence, courage, and sheer determination. Joan of Leeds proved that even in the most restrictive circumstances, human agency and the desire for freedom can triumph over any system designed to control us.